Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's Planning Committee. I have been advised that there are no fire drills planned for tonight, but if the alarm does sound, Mrs. Snook will overhear, will ascertain the situation and provide further instructions. I would remind you that this meeting will be broadcast live and recorded playback on the Maidstone Borough Council website. But will anyone else be recording or filming these proceedings? I ask so that people at the meeting will be aware of this if it is in fact happening. No, we do not appear to have that. Members who are using mobile phones or tablets are asked to please ensure that these are on silent and are only being used with regard to the business on the agenda this evening. Item 1. Apologies. We have received apologies from Councillors English, Hemsley and Stockwell. Item 2, are there any substitute members? Councillor Burton.
Yes, Councillor Matthew Burton in for Councillor Mike Hemsley.
Thank you. Are there any visiting members? Councillor Hinder, would you like to say why you're here? Any further members?
Councillor Perry to speak on agenda item 13.
Thank you. Item 4. I understand there are no items recommended for withdrawal from this agenda. However, items 21, 23, 25, 26 and 27 have been rolled over to the adjourned meeting date of the 5th of October. So if anybody are here for those particular hearings, it'd probably be appropriate to leave. The date... Thank you. Item 5. The date of the adjourned meeting will be the 5th of October. Item 6. Urgent items. I have agreed to take the update reports of Head of Planning and Development as urgent items, as they contain further information relating to the applications to be considered at this meeting. Did anybody wish to go through those updates? Do you feel you're... Everybody's happy with them? Yep. Okay. Are there any disclosures by members or officers? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I need to declare in relation to item 15 at Gleamingwood Drive, Lordswood, item 16 at North Street Farm Cottages in Boxley, and item 25, the STEM School in Vinters Park, Newcut Road, that I'm a member of Boxley Parish Council, but I took no part in any discussion by the Parish Council, and I therefore intend to speak and vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 8. I intend to take lobbying when we get to each item. Item 9. I move that the items on the agenda to be taken in public as proposed. Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Item 10. Minutes of the meeting held on 7th of September 2017 and adjourned to the 14th of September. Are they agreed as a correct record? All agreed then. Item 11. Presentation of petitions. There are no petitions this evening as far as I'm aware. No, that seems to be the case. Twelve deferred items. I'll ask the officer.
Thank you. Yeah, first item, I've got nothing further to update on that item. Item 2, the Forstall Lane application, it does say 7th of September adjourned to the 14th of September. Obviously, the applicant is arranging meetings with both the landowner who owns the Ransom Strip and is also having meetings with Kent Highways to look at the alternatives that members deferred the application for. So those meetings are ongoing. And so there will be a slight delay bringing that application back to committee following the conclusion of those meetings. I'm hopeful that that will come forward sometime in October. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Right, we now move over to agenda item 13. Land east of the paddocks, George Street, Staplehurst. Sorry, I've got it the wrong way around. We're now moving to 15 first. Unit 33, adjacent to Lordswood Industrial Estate, Lordswood, Kent. We have some speakers for this. So can I first ask Councillor Clark, Boxley Parish Council. Sorry. We'll introduce the item first and we'll also ask the legal officer.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a short announcement for members of the public, and in particular those who are speaking on an item this evening. As you've just heard, the item is announced by the chairman, and then the planning officer introduces the item. The chairman will then call the speakers. When you hear your name called, please could you come forward to the table in front of you and take a seat. To speak, press the middle button. You do not need to hold it down. The button will turn green and the ring around the mouthpiece on the microphone will turn red. You will have 3 minutes to speak. I have a timer on the computer in front of me, and either I or the chairman will indicate to you when your 3 minutes are up. Once you've finished speaking, please press the middle button again. It will turn white and return to your seat. You may hear some of the speakers referred to as visiting members. They are members of the council, but they don't sit on this committee. They also have 3 minutes to speak, but they have no right to vote on any of the applications. Start items, James? No?
Thank you very much. By all means, carry on seated, but we have to introduce the item with the officers first.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try not to keep you too long. It's an application, as said, that Unit 33 on the Lordswood Industrial Estate in Lordswood. We've got an aerial photo here just showing you the context of the application. Obviously, the unit is in here, and you've got the wider industrial estate out to the north, and it's an allocated business site, both in the local plan and the emerging or final draft plan that hopefully will be adopted shortly. Here's a sort of an OS plan showing the building and the site red line area where you can see the building here, and the application relates to an extension to the east or northeast in this section here. Just take you through some photos so you can get an appreciation of the site and its surroundings. Here's the entrance with the main road. That's the proposed development area to the side of the existing unit with the trees in the background. From Gleemanwood Drive, other one. That's the existing industrial area. And that's the northern elevation of the existing building. And that's looking back towards the buildings from the north. And you can see the proposal with those trees essentially being partly where the extension is going to be located. And that's the woodland that surrounds to the south. This is the area of Woodland where the extension is proposed, and sort of general condition you can see there. So essentially the main issues for this application are that it's an unallocated business site where we encourage business growth. The applicant has said the extensions for an intended or expected and projected growth which will generate 25 to 30 jobs and other obviously indirect economic benefits. The other main reason or principal issue you'll probably have read from the report is the ancient woodland issue, which obviously this extension sort of intrudes into. You can see the proposals there with the existing trees dotted and outlines where you can get an appreciation for the number of trees to be removed. I think it's in the region of about 30 trees to be removed. From an arboricultural perspective, they're not good quality trees, but it is ancient woodland, which the MPPF and our own policies class as irreplaceable habitats, where it's only really if the need and benefits of the development outweigh that very, very strong support for their retention. The applicant is proposing other benefits for woodland management plan, ecology enhancements and new planting, but obviously there will be a loss of ancient woodland as defined by the Natural England and the Forestry Commission. You can see here the elevations, and it's essentially another bay which creates that L shape. Here's the new outlined in red. You can see the new two-storey extension. And it's got a first floor with offices and then the ground floor is extra accommodation to allow the growth of the business. The officer's view is that, albeit the strong protection for ancient woodland, that the need for jobs and the fact that it's in an economic development area and the potential for replanting and the condition of the existing woodland, which you saw from the photos wasn't in good condition at the moment, that outweighed that policy presumption for its protection. So the officer's recommendation is approval subject to the conditions in the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I understand it's Councillor Clark, Boxley Parish Council. Thank you.
Good evening. Boxley Parish Council's reasons for requesting refusal are within your report, and so I'll only speak on the most pressing concerns. The Parish Council cannot understand why Kent Highway raises no objections to the application when it knows the main junction with Lordswood Lane is at capacity and this company is expanding its business. In 3 years, the company expects the existing staff base at the site to double to cope with the increase in business, and that it and other businesses expect. This means more lorry, van and car movements in and out of the site and onto the already congested local roads. Even without the planned development at Gibraltar Farm, the Gleamingwood Drive and Lordswood Lane junction is overloaded and is of a totally inadequate design with no safe pedestrian or cyclist crossing point. The additional traffic movements from the proposed development will add to the congestion and safety issues already experienced. Junction 3 of the M2 has exceeded its design capacity and is under strain, and this will be the primary junction for goods traffic from Brown Europe. It is therefore only right that the applicant pays towards improving the current infrastructure. It saddens the Parish Council to report that despite the area being designated ancient woodland, proven to be inhabited by dormice, MBC chooses not to protect it with tree preservation orders, with the result that someone has recently cleared undergrowth and trees at the site and laid a hard standing. It is felt that no such commercial development should be allowed anywhere in the borough unless the applicant contributes towards the improvement of the local infrastructure. If each development is judged as standalone because it only adds 40 or 50 vehicular movements per day, but 5 developments are allowed in a small area, the impact on local communities is huge. If MBC is minded to approve this application, Section 106 contributions should be secured to provide funding for local improvements which are needed. In particular, funding for the continuation of the cycle path from Bradger Road to Lordswood Lane, including curb drops at Revenge Road. A formal pedestrian cyclist crossing point created at Lordswood Lane near the junction with Gleamingwood Drive to include flashing safety signage to warn drivers they are approaching a pedestrian cycle crossing. Double yellow lines at both sides of Gleamingwood Drive. Upgrade of the Gleamingwood Drive Lordswood Junction, including its lighting to deal with the additional traffic on site. The Parish Council also asked the MBC immediately progresses the outstanding Parish Council request to fully protect the remaining ancient woodland along Gleamingwood Drive and around the site. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, the next speaker on this is Mr. Booth for the applicant.
Good evening. The applicant is a local family business established in 1983. The directors and officers of the company are all within the same family and all reside in the borough or a neighbouring borough. Peak employment of the business prior to the recession was around 70 staff. Current employment is around 15 staff, including an apprentice on a formal apprenticeship scheme. The applicant previously built and occupied a significantly larger building on Revenge Road nearby and remained there until the recession. The business was adversely affected by this recession and downsized to the smaller building on Gleamingwood Drive. The light engineering business was restructured to concentrate on high-value, fast-response orders, and now growth within this business gives rise to a demand for more and better office and warehouse space. The application site is within a zone designated by the local plan for economic development and is within the Lordswood Industrial Estate. The majority of the proposed development is sited on existing hard surface yard or car park. Notwithstanding the land is designated in the local plan for economic development, the trees within the footprint of the proposed development are designated as ancient woodland. But we would argue that these trees are actually there only as a result of landscaping at the site around the time that the existing buildings and car park were laid out, and that in fact the ancient woodland designation is a designation in name only, and the trees are no more ancient than the existing buildings at the application site. However, the screening of the industrial units on the site provided by the trees to the east is a valuable amenity in our view, and hence the proposal includes a commitment to providing new planting on the eastern boundary of the site to re-establish and improve the screening, which would be lost by the removal of the trees for the proposed development. The applicant has taken his responsibilities for the ecological issues associated with the site very seriously and has expended considerable time, money and energy in preparing reports on bat and dormouse colonies and habitats, and will commit, as part of any consent given, to undertake those mitigation measures recommended by the experts in their respective fields. The number and timing of traffic flow movements through the industrial estate and at Gleamingwood Drive as a result of the proposed extension is considered to be negligible in the context of the current demands on the road network locally. In conclusion, we would ask that the committee give full consideration to the many and varied benefits to consenting this proposed scheme. Most significant amongst these benefits is the scope for significant increased employment at the site, which is designated for economic development within the local plan, but also by careful conditioning of a consent, the remaining woodland can be enhanced and be subject to better management, and the existing ecology at the site can similarly be enhanced and provided with a better managed habitat. We therefore ask the committee to consent the proposed scheme. Thank you.
Thank you. You've just about squeezed in the time. Can I at this point ask members for any lobbying on this matter? That looks like just about all of us. Yes. Yeah. Okay. It does look like lobbying to all parties in one way or another. Okay then. Right. Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I am again now. Yeah, I can understand where the applicants are coming from in terms of this, but I really do not understand our professional advice. Paragraph 118 of the National Planning Policy Framework is absolutely clear, as is the Forestry Commission and Natural England guidance on decisions that relate to ancient woodland. And that they all state that ancient woodland is not a collection of trees. It is, you treat it as an organism. It's the soil, it's the ground floor, it's everything that goes with it. And that it is irreplaceable, and once it's gone, it's gone. The whole of Lordswood and Walderslade was ancient woodland. When I was, fairly younger, it was all woodland. Now there is very, very little left, and there's very, very little left in the UK. And that's why government guidance is quite clear. And when they talk about that balancing act and whether it outweighs the loss of an irreplaceable resource, they're talking about something that it's for the national or regional interest. They're not talking about an extension on an industrial estate. I mean, I'm sorry, it's not at all the way that the document is written. I mean, we know some of the inspectors' decisions we've had around the buffers for ancient woodland. I mean, this isn't a buffer for an ancient woodland. You know, how can we fight fights at Bluebell Wood in Barming about buffers and so on, and then we're talking about actually eating into the wood? Again, coming back to the protected species. I mean, hazel dormice are incredibly rare now, and that's why they receive the legal protection they do. And what they are vulnerable to is disturbance. And what paragraph 118 of the National Planning Policy Framework describes is not just damage to ancient woodland, it's or deterioration, which means disturbance. So, frankly, with that balancing act, I just do not understand where this report is coming from. Yes, it's an employment area because there is employment in that general area, and on the concrete hard standing and so on, you can do what you like as long as you have the appropriate buffer as required by national guidance. But you are not allowed to eat into the woodland. So therefore, I just want to simply move that we refuse this application because of the damage to ancient woodland, which is an irreplaceable habitat according to the MPPF, and the fact that no buffers can be introduced as is required in the standing guidance from the Forestry Commission and the and Natural England. And I think that is the only matter here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. You've officially made a proposal. Is there a seconder? Would you like to speak?
Yes, Chairman. I couldn't endorse the view that Councillor Harwood gave more. When you look at the satellite image of this site, you have the M20 to the south, and when you look at the potential for wildlife to network between across the site, this is a key link between woods to the west and woods to the east. You've got the clearing just to the east of the site, but when you look at this proposal, you're almost making that woodland wafer thin at one point, which would almost certainly lead to detritus being thrown into the wood, brambles, nettles, etc. It will basically suffocate a link that is currently in place. And as Councillor Harwood says, so many times we've fought for our buffer zones around ancient woodland, and we've looked for concessions in certain areas, but this is going right to the heart of the wood. It really beggars belief that we're looking at this proposal.
I'll ask Councillor Burton to follow through on that, and then after that I'll ask officers to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. I was actually just going to ask a question to Councillor Harwood on something that he'd said, and it's to do with the policy wording in the MPPF, because you did say that that the guidance in the MPPF also concerns deterioration of the woodland, and you made a little bit of a lexical leap to say that also therefore includes disturbance. Now, we've seen some pictures of, and you may tell me, and if so, I bow to your greater knowledge on the issue, but we've seen some pictures of the state of the woodland and the rubbish and what looked like a sort of fire pit somewhere in the middle of it. Does the mitigation and the management plan for the surrounding area not actually bring into, shouldn't it be brought into consideration when we're talking about the deterioration of the ancient woodland? Because actually we could say that in a particularly shabby patch of ancient woodland, maybe there is some assistance to that, but just some clarification, please.
I'll ask Councillor Harwood to respond.
Thank you. To be designated as ancient woodland, the woodland had to be there at the first time, when the first detailed mapping around 1600 were produced. And before that date, woodland wasn't widely planted. So the understanding is that woodland that was there in 1600 has been there since the end of the Ice Age, essentially. I mean, it's been there for a very, very long time. And it is not so much what's happening on the surface, it's the fact that the mycorrhizal fungi and things going on underground have not been messed about, the seed bank is the same. And to my view, fragmentation by creating a pinch point and just lighting, noise, having buildings close to it which upset the hydrology, all lead to the deterioration that is described in the National Planning Policy Framework. In terms of planting a few shrubs, that's bad. You should not plant into ancient woodland. It is a mixed ancient woodland. It will sort itself out. In the long term, it's probably been there 10,000 years. In another 10,000 years, hopefully it's still there, it will have evolved further. But planting a few shrubs and putting a few boxes for dormice they won't use is neither here nor there.
I'll now ask officers to respond.
Yeah, thank you, members. A lot of you will remember, obviously, the Bluebell Woods appeal land east of Hermitage Lane. Obviously, discussions in terms of the standing advice from Natural England and the Forestry Mission do go into and make a distinction between recommended 15-metre buffers and what is mitigation and what is compensation, two very different matters that you weigh in the balancing exercise. Compensation is obviously the loss of ancient woodland, the soils. Mitigation is, in effect, let's say, the buffer areas. That helps mitigate the impacts on ancient woodland, and planting helps mitigate. So there are two distinct elements to woodland. But what you must do in terms of when you come to your decision is weigh up, as a material consideration, the benefits that potentially can arise, and what I would encourage members to do, because MPPF is very clear in its assessment in terms of what paragraph 118 says, you have to, in my recommendation, make that balancing exercise in your grounds of refusal if that's what you're going to take forward. So in effect, you would have to turn around and say the harm to the ancient woodland, or the benefits arising from the job creation of the site, are outweighed by the harm to the ancient woodland in this instance, and therefore it's contrary to paragraph 118. So you're making that balancing exercise in your decision-making process. I do agree with what Councillor Harwood is saying, but just if I can just ask members to remember the difference between mitigation and compensation. You'd have to take into account whether this application compensates, i.e. replaces that ancient soil, the ancient woodland soils elsewhere, and obviously the mitigation, does the application include any buffer areas around the new extension, which also take into account those new trees. So there is a distinction, because that's what we would be arguing were members to go down that appeal route. And a lot of those of you involved in the land east of Hermitage Lane will know the discussions that we had to go down to look at those mitigating factors and those compensationary factors.
Councillor Prendergast.
Mr Bailey, I'm supporting Councillor Harwood here, because the guidance is quite clear. It says compensation should not form part of the assessment of the merits of the development itself. So And I know this was raised. I've got a number of ancient woodland within my ward that I'm really concerned about, and I can recall Councillor Harwood making a comment about we're losing too many trees with TPOs and ancient woodland, and it is mostly development-led. And I think, as a council, we should be doing everything we can to protect these. So I just wanted to make that point, that we shouldn't be considering the compensation as part of the merits of this development.
I don't want to go back to that old ground. There is a legal dispute, and I was involved in the land east of Hermitage Lane, where council opinion, there is a disagreement. I totally agree with what the standing advice says. There is a legal dispute between Natural England standing advice and what case law actually says. Now, I don't want members to go into detail because I'm not going to disagree with what the standing advice says. It clearly says that. I'm just advising members that on the land east of Hermitage Lane, our council opinion was on the basis that case law disagrees with the standing advice. It's never been resolved, but quite clearly, I'm just letting members know, quite clearly, you're right, Councillor Prendergast, what the guidance says. I'm just letting you know from past experience the difference between what that advice says and what case law actually dictates, that we can take into account in terms of the overall merits and the balancing exercise, in terms of the mitigation. You have to decide what is mitigation and compensation. So I just wish to lay that very clearly, because I know some of you might have attended that hearing and that would have clearly come out, sorry, in that public inquiry, and that came out in that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. As I see there's no other hands going up, so I'm going to ask Councillor Harwood to confirm his grounds for refusal, please, so he can get the words correct.
Thank you, Chairman. That considering the balancing exercise of the proposed extension and additional employment, the committee, with the words can be tweaked as appropriate, the committee felt that the loss of the irreplaceable resource of ancient woodland and the limited scope to introduce buffers or meaningful compensation made them come down on the size of refusing this application. It might be worth noting as well that translocation of woodland soils has not been proven to be effective. It is, and I think the key point here, I think it might be worth adding in a note about the fact that this is a linear stretch of woodland and impacting the fragmentation and isolation which would occur should this application go ahead would lead to deterioration of those areas of woodland which are not touched by the development. So I think we tick the boxes for both damage and deterioration as referred to both in the MPPF and the standing advice.
Sorry, just taking paragraph 118 into account, that the harm arising from the development is not, the benefits arising from the scheme do not outweigh the harm. So as long as we add that to the end to make sure we capture the balancing exercise, then that is a ground of refusal that can be taken forward, and that's the officer advice.
Okay, unless there's anything more to be said on this matter, bear with, and I think I'm going to say bear with several times tonight. Bear with us whilst we put ourselves on side. We will resolve the wording and get back to you. It's not a full adjournment, it's just a few minutes. Okay, we're back on track. Will members please listen to what the officers have drafted?
Okay, this is the draft reason. The development would cause an unacceptable and unjustified loss of ancient woodland, which would have adverse effects on an irreplaceable habitat and the ecological importance of the site. This would be contrary to policy DM3 of the final draft Maidstone local plan and paragraph 118 of the MPPF. The benefits of the development are not considered to outweigh this significant harm.
Councillor Harwood, is that acceptable? Yes. Councillor Clark. Okay, we're going to draw that to a vote. So we now have grounds for refusal. Who votes for those grounds of proposal? Eight against. 1. Abstentions? 2. Right, that confirms that the application is refused. We now move on to the next item. Agenda item 16, land north of Street Farm, Cottages, Porridge Lane, Boxley, Kent. Once the officers are ready, I'll ask them to take it forward.
Thank you, Chairman. This is an application at land north of Street Farm Cottage, Forge Lane in Boxley. It's erection of 2 numbered dwellings with associated landscaping and car parking. So what you have in front of you, members, is an aerial photograph showing Hamlet of Boxley. In terms of the application site, this is the application site here, and it shows the context of the development. You've got residential dwellings, 2 semi-detached dwellings in this location here, and also you've got residential dwellings here and existing properties, as you can see, in the context going out in a ribbon development. Apologise, along here. So it just gives you, in terms of the context of the streetscape surrounding the development. And I think you'll notice from this aerial photograph that in terms of assessment, because whilst acknowledging this application is within the open countryside, so policies SP17 and ENV28 of the adopted version apply. Obviously, I would say in the context, harm has to be demonstrated in this context. So what the aerial photograph shows, and you have to make an assessment on, is this an isolated field which contributes significantly to the character and appearance of the area. I appreciate some of the objectors who've raised an objection to the application will consider that, but I'm just saying to members, if you look at it in the context of the surrounding development and in your officer's view in terms of how you assess harm. So this is the application site, the red line boundary. This is the boundary of Anvil Cottage with the application site to the right of the photograph. This is the rear of Anvil Cottage showing the lean-to. Again showing the rear again. With the conservatory, there were concerns raised in terms of privacy and amenity issues from the residents of this property. This is the interior of the site looking north. So you've got Forge Lane over in this location here. You've got Anvil Cottage here. So in effect, this is the application site. You'd have a property on the front, and then you'd have a property. You've got the lane that comes down here. That dwelling would front onto the lane over here, and it would have its rear garden over to here. So in terms of normal separation distances, they are achieved with this application. So this is the view of the cottages opposite the application sites. You've got the application site here, you've got Anvil Cottage here, the existing residential dwellings here, and then photographs will move down here and it will connect up with the other two pair of semi-detached dwellings that you'll see next. So as we move across the site, again, this is the application site that extends down here. And again, there's in the context of this existing pair, almost sort of terminates the existing residential dwelling. So in effect, the two dwellings would sit in the context, one at the front here and one in this context around here. So this is a close-up of the existing pair of semi-detached buildings. This is a closer view, Anvil Cottage here, with the application site in this proximity. So as I said, there'd be a dwelling that would front onto the site here, access down there, and there would be the other dwelling accessed off to the rear. You'd get a chalet style, so rooms in the roof dwelling that tries to pick up some of the detailing of this dwelling in terms of it's got its cat slide roof, and then you've got a two-storey dwelling at the rear of the site that links in with those other two semi-detached dwellings that I previously referred to. So this was the application site has been amended due to concerns raised by officers. This is just a general run-through of the details prior to amending. Just shows the context. This is the plot 1 elevation. You've got Anvil Cottage off to the left-hand side here. There wasn't a comfortable relationship in terms of the officer's view between this dwelling and the proposed dwelling, so it just shows front, rear and the flank elevations. Plot 2 at the back of the site, and then we move to the amended site layout. So this is the amended site layout that you're proposing. You've got Anvil Cottage, a better transitional arrangement between these two dwellings with a two-storey at the back which links in with the two-storey element at the back here. So this just shows it in context. I say a chalet style, it's sort of rooms in the roof, but a lower ridge height dwelling at the front. So you've got the front and the rear, and then you've got the flank elevations here. Then you go into plot 2, which is the plot to the back of the site, and you can see in terms of that would front onto the access lane that runs down here, and then you've got the other dwellings in this locality. So front, rear, and the two flank elevations here. So in terms of the application site, the report is quite detailed in terms of it includes previous inspectors' recommendations. Obviously, there have been comments raised about the sustainability. The case officer addresses that in the context of the report. The site is also located within an area of outstanding natural beauty where policy seeks to conserve and enhance the landscape quality. And as the site is within the defined countryside for policy purposes, it is protected by policy ENV 28 of the adopted local plan and SP 17. So whilst, as I previously said at the start of the presentation, in policy terms it is in countryside, and in fact your officer's report sets out that were permission to be granted it would have to be advertised as a departure from policy. Again, as I said, that policy looks at harm to the character and appearance of the countryside. So your officer's report sets out that in this context, and because this isn't seen as an isolated a pair of dwellings in the countryside, that it doesn't actually cause harm to that character and appearance. Other matters for consideration are set out in the report and conclude there's no impact on highway safety, ecology, heritage matters, or impacts on a neighbourhood amenity. And as such, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, members. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We now have a number of speakers on the issue. First and foremost, I'd like to ask Mr. Wilmot.
Chairman, committee members, good evening. I live just 30 metres from the proposed site and speak on behalf of myself and other local residents. I'm quite shocked and appalled by how many policies this application goes against. The report even states that the proposal is not justified in housing terms. Because the site lies within the Kent Downs AONB, where paragraph 115 of the NPPF indicates that development should be restricted, the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply to this proposal. In a recent appeal decision, the inspector notes that development in Boxley is not considered sustainable. This is the view shared by Maidstone Borough Council in 2008 and an inspector in 2008, then another council officer in November 2016 and another inspector in May this year. I would ask what significant changes have occurred in the village in the last 4 months to go against the established views of the council and the inspectorate. Policy ENV 28 requires special circumstances for the development. The planning inspector in May this year specifically notes that policy ENV 28 does not include an exception for infilling. Justification due to infilling and rounding off the village is not supported by policy or the inspectorate. The AONB management plan states that any development must conserve, enhance and maintain the character of the AONB. It does not say not harm. Any development must have a positive impact. I disagree that this proposal has little impact, let alone a positive effect, conserving and enhancing. The inspector in May this year also noted that increasing the concentration of residential development in this area would incrementally harm the overall character of the village and AONB. The residents and I take great offence at the comment that the Trust has a long-standing interest in the area and see this as fostering their relationship with the village. The Trust's only interest in the village is financial. None of the charitable work helps the village in any way. I'm yet to see any local or national policy that allows for charities to be exempt from planning rules. The report states there is an adequate 5-year supply of housing. The borough has no need for housing and Boxley certainly has no need for any new housing. Does this very modest windfall really justify going against all of the countryside policies? I do wonder what the point in having these policies is if planning can choose to ignore them and previous inspectors' recommendations at their will. I worry greatly that the application goes against the very clear and consistent precedent set in Boxley over many years. As a new president would give the green light for other developments in Boxley, incrementally destroying the village and the Kent Downs AONB. The environmental health report submitted notes that the nearest main drainage sewer system is over 1 kilometre from the site, yet the application states that it will use the main system. There is no mention of this in the report or provision on the site plan for cesspits or soakways, and I see no suitable siting for these on the proposed site. I do not see on the site plan the provision of turning areas as required in the report and the KCC report. All I ask is that the local and national policies be applied correctly, fairly and consistently, and this application be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. There is absolutely no need for clapping, though. Thank you. I'm now going to ask Councillor Clark of Boxley Parish Council, yet again. And please refrain from clapping or applause or even any other form of chanting.
Good evening again. I'm here to represent Boxley Parish Council and as a resident of Boxley Village. This statement is given in full support of Mr Wilnock's comments, which, as he says, reflects the thoughts and feelings of residents who live in the village, many of whom have written to borough councillors. I would like to address some of the points made in the Comprehensive Planning Committee report and some of the legislation cited. Paragraph 55 of the National Planning Policy Framework quoted in the report. For starts, we feel this development satisfies none of the reasons clearly stated special reasons. It won't promote sustainable development. As someone who lives within the village, I know from experience that a car is vital. The nearest shops, primary school and other facilities are 1.5 kilometres away, within cycling distance but too far to be convenient for walking. The report notes there is a parade of shops within walking distance with footpaths running the whole length. The footpath is wholly unlit and in places just 70 centimetres wide. The average pram, for example, is 60 centimetres wide. There is clearly no longer any need for rural workers to live in close to work because the 2 farmhouses, which were mentioned, the semi-detached ones, have recently been sold. It wouldn't represent viable use of heritage building or use redundant or disused buildings, and finally, it wouldn't be a development of exceptional quality or innovative nature. On the other hand, as the inspectors have stated in previous cases, the site lies within the North Downs Special Landscape Area and an area of outstanding natural beauty. Paragraph 115 of the NPPF requires that great weight should be given to conserving the landscape and scenic beauty of areas of outstanding natural beauty. Specific policies within this framework indicate development should be restricted, that the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply in this case, as can be seen in footnote 9 to paragraph 14 of the MPPF. Policy ENV 28 seeks to resist development except in certain limited circumstances. This site, however, doesn't comply with any of the 5 stated categories. I also note, as Mr Wilmot did, that in a very recent report in which the appeal was turned down, specifically stated the policies not include an exception for infilling. As a parish council, we find it very frustrating to see planning policies so disregarded in application reports. And finally, I'd like to mention the adopted and emerging local plan. Boxley is not identified as a settlement where minor development is considered acceptable in principle. However, policy SP17 of the plan states, among other things, that in the countryside, proposals which do not harm the character and appearance of an area will be permitted. In our view, not only will the development harm the character and appearance of the area in a significant way, it will sadly open the door to many more applications, therefore incrementally changing the face and character of Boxley Village. I thank you for listening and urge you to reject this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another person just scraped into the right timing. And now I'm going to ask Councillor Mrs Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman, members. I make no apologies if what I'm about to say is reiterating what other speakers have already said, but feel it is so important for it to be stated. The Inspector's report of May 2017 is a pivotal document to consider when making your decision on this application. It states that an application to build one dwelling in Boxley Village was refused on the grounds that it was unsustainable and contrary to sections 55 and 115 of the MPPF and contrary to SB 17 of the emerging Maidstone local plan. In the words of the 2017 Planning Inspector's decision, he can see no reason to disagree with the previous Inspector's decision when dismissing an appeal for a single dwelling in Porridge Lane in 2008, saying that whilst a regular bus service runs through Boxley Village, there is no shops or services available in the immediate area apart from a public house. The Inspector has judged that future occupiers will be heavily reliant upon the private motor car to service their day-to-day needs. The report before you states that the bus service is adequate, but it does not go to local schools. Therefore, at peak rush hour times, parents will be adding to the traffic congestion by having to take their children to school by car. Nothing has changed in the 4 months since the last appeal decision, and I fail to see why this application is being recommended for approval when 2 previous inspectors have dismissed appeals for smaller developments in the village. In the report of Inspector Reid, he states quite clearly and succinctly, paragraph 11, that increasing the concentration of residential development in this area would incrementally harm the overall character of the village and in turn erode the character of the Kent Downs AONB and the North Downs SLA landscape. He further points out significantly that no cases of permitted development in Boxley were provided at the appeal, and this still remains the case. The report acknowledges at 7.50 that there would be a departure from the development plan if this was permitted, and it will represent an acceptable windfall development towards the housing needs in the borough. It should be recognised that there is no identified local housing need within the village of Boxley that will be satisfied by this application. The officer has failed to identify a proven need for development within this village, and I would therefore ask you refuse this application because it is clearly contrary to the MPPF and the Maidstone Development Plan. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hinder. Right, I now open it up to the floor and ask Councillor Harwood to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I have to watch my language, I think, on this one. If the last recommendation in Gleaming Wood Drive was incomprehensible, the recommendation of this one is plainly bonkers. I really am aghast. If you look at this site, you can see the Rochester Bridge land. There's not a single tree, there's not a single twig, there is absolutely nothing. And I know we've got form here that Rochester Bridge Trust have tried to build things on greenfield sites in the past and had officer recommendations of approval. But this site is so significant within this scarp slope of the area of outstanding natural beauty, because it provides a green buffer around that little hamlet. And to call Forge Lane, I mean, it's not, it's a track. Anyone who knows it, it's a very narrow track that you walk up to the housing. So, you know, the inevitable extra cars, the lighting that will come here, so you'll not only have an intrusion into the AONB landscape, which should be treated in planning terms in the same way as a national park, but you're going to have an intrusion at night by vehicles going up beyond the point where they usually do, and with all of the lighting on, the security lighting on the houses and the windows be lit up, everything that goes with it. So I think there is harm to the landscape by both day and night, the protected landscape. In terms of not being able to see it, I mean, yeah, I mean, if you're driving along the street, you wouldn't be able to see it. But if you are on the Pilgrim's Way to the north, walking along to the very, very heavily visited Boxley Warren Local Nature Reserve and Special Area for Conservation, you see the back of this western edge of the village very, very easily. And I do not recognise the statement that it is not visible. So therefore, once again, I suggest that I want to move that we refuse this application. I don't think there is any need for a balancing act here. I think, frankly, by extending the urban conurbation, it will cause harm to the open countryside, which is contrary to SP17 of the evolving local plan and EMV 28 of the existing borough-wide local plan. The site is clearly not sustainable. I mean, for someone who walks back and forth to Boxley a lot, I wouldn't like to do that with small children or a pushchair or anything else. And it will add further cars to, you know, that's why the traffic calming's in Boxley Village. That's why, because of the problems that vehicles are causing. So I don't believe it's sustainable because it will require the access to the motor car. And I think there is the point, we really need to make the point that the intrusion in the landscape will be by day and by night, by expanding the coverage of domestic paraphernalia into the open countryside, and the green buffer role of this site is important in its own right. And I know we can't control and keep it as rough grass and trees and so on, but we can stop it having houses built in it and car parks. So, you know, I know we'll have to think about the wording in more detail, and that has come a little bit from the heart, but that's what I've moved anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. I noticed that 3 other council members have stuck up their hands, but I'm going to ask Councillor Prendergast first, because I assume she may wish to second.
That was my intention, to second it. I've indicated that already. Yes, I agree with the points that Councillor... I don't know what's happening tonight. I seem to be agreeing with Councillor Harwood and everything. Yes, I think the words that were coming to my mind was the increased concentration of development in the countryside, and that's where I see the harm and the sustainability. So yes, ENV 28, SP 17, by day, by night, harm to the AONB. So yes, I second that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Prendergast. In my haste to get through the evening, I've forgotten to take note of any lobbying. I'm fairly sure that most of us have been lobbied on this. Can I have hands for those who have been lobbied? Yes, that's everybody. I'm now going to ask Councillor Borton.
Well, I'll be very brief because I agree with everything that's been said so far, and it's very clear the community don't want this. It's very clear that it's in breach of a whole load of planning policies, and like Councillor Harwood, I can't see, having read the report either, why we've got a... I was shocked when I read the report to find out it was because it sounded like the report said it was going to be for refusal. So I'm not quite sure what's going on here, but I support everything that's been said so far and think it should be refused.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
Just
very quickly to enhance it, can the officers put up the view from the east towards the village? Go back one. Back one. That's it. The views from the east will be harmed because instead of seeing that greenery, you will see the development, and it will be the distant views from the east will be damaged. So that's part of the harm, and for that, that's all we need. SP 17.
Thank you, councillors. I'm minded to take a refusal by the feel of it at the moment. And I think the officers have already taken that into account and are already wording it. So I shall ask the officers, are you prepared for this? Do you want a couple of minutes?
I think I've got two grounds that members are potentially looking at. The development would cause an unacceptable impact on the landscape character of the North Downs AONB by reasons of its introduction of built form within an area of openness which contributes to the character of the village and the area of outstanding natural beauty landscape, both by day and by night, and the introduction of domestic paraphernalia contributes to that harm or to such effect. The development would be located in an unsustainable form of development whereby future occupants would be reliant on unsustainable modes of development contrary to the MPPF. Obviously, added on to grounds 1 would be policies ENV 28, ENV 33, 34 and the MPPF, and obviously policies SP 17 of the emerging local plan, the final draft local plan. So that's, if I could ask for delegated along those grounds to frame it along those lines.
Councillor Burton, did you want to say something?
Yeah, can I just clarify something? Can we actually, in the second point, can we reference the inspector's decision in May regarding the unsustainability of Boxley as well, because I think it strengthens that ground?
I think what we would be doing by saying it's unsustainable, we've used the inspector's previous decisions when we write the report. So I think by saying it's unsustainable, that would be further endorsed, which is, as you're right, a material consideration which justifies making that point. So we would add that in our report if the application went to appeal, obviously.
Councillor Harwood, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, very quickly. Mr Bailey, he talks about the North Downs AONB. I think we should probably say the Kent Downs AONB because, of course, with the Kent Downs AONB, we're signatories to the Kent Downs AONB management plan, and there are a number of policies in there around protecting long views. And the only other thing I was wondering is, did we need to specifically reference the views from the west towards the village from the Scarp Slope, Pilgrim's Way and Boxley Warren Local Nature Reserve was just a thought, because I mean clearly the way that the report has been written, it's almost talking about the only views are from the highway, when actually this site is crisscrossed with public rights of way, some of them very historic, that you can see the back of the village.
Again, I say bear with.
No, I can add that. Certainly, I can add that into, and I've picked up what you're saying, particularly so adding in terms of where the harm's coming to, and particularly in views from the west of the village, from the north, from the Scarp Slope face, so and the North Downs Way. I can pick those up into the grounds as well.
Sorry, keep coming back. Rather than North Downs Way, it's the Pilgrim's Way. The Pilgrim's Way runs parallel with the North Downs Way, but is lower and doesn't have a big wood in the way.
Are we all agreed then that we are now going to vote to refuse this application?
For the avoidance of doubt with delegated authority, for the reasons.
Right, all hands up in favour of refusing this application. That was a unanimous vote. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll give those visitors from Boxley a few moments to leave before I go on to the next subject. Right, we're resuming official business now, ladies and gentlemen. Now, agenda item 13, page 3 on the agenda. Land east of the Paddocks, George Street, Staplehurst, Kent. I ask officers to lead on this.
Thank you, Chairman. It's me again. This is an application for change of use of land to east of the Paddocks to residential, including siting of 2 mobile homes, 2 touring caravans, day rooms, washrooms for accommodation of gypsy families, and that is an amended description, and obviously the red line is an amended application that has been reduced since the application was first submitted. So this is an aerial view of the site. In terms of nearby gypsy and traveller sites that have been approved, you've got the site here, which is off to the west, which is Bluebell Farm. Again, that's an allocated site, and I'll refer to it under GT111 in the final draft local plan. And you've also got the Paddocks here, which is a allocated site in the final draft local plan reference GT110. So the application site, and I'll show you the allocations in a minute, it does extend to a much larger area than this application. And in effect, this application site includes this area of the Sand School that's here, so it comes down here. And you will note that actually part of the site that members will be considering tonight is actually included in the GT110 allocation of the final draft local plan, and part of it is outside of it. But obviously, in terms of considerations of the application, obviously, members have got DM15 of the final draft local plan, which is a G&T policy specific, and obviously this site hasn't got any landscape designations attached to it. So a key consideration in terms of tonight's consideration would also be in terms of the acceptance of this site in the Paddock site, and in terms of the difference between this site and the site next door in terms of policy context. So just going through the site, so in terms of this is the red line boundary, and then this is the application details, the site layout details with the proposed access shown here. You've got the paddocks over this site. This is the stable block over here, and this area around here is roughly where that sand school was proposed. So in terms of the policy allocation, it extends to approximately this area along here. So it's approximately this area here. So you've got the 2 statics, you've got the amenity buildings positioned here, and you've got an existing well-established landscaping screen around the site. So this is the allocation that I've referred to you. Unfortunately, it hasn't coming out quite so clear, but this is the GT110 allocation in the final draft for the paddocks, which allows the expansion of this site to up to 4 pitches. And obviously, where the paddocks, you can just see this extends up to here, the edge of the paddock. So this is where I was saying in the area of the sand school that part of that site is actually included in that allocation, part of it not, just so members are clear. And then what you've got in terms of Bluebell Farm, which is off to the west, again, a similar allocation in the local plan for 4 units, but obviously you're not considering it. Just gives you that context for assessing cumulative issues that the report goes into. So going into the photographs of the site, this is the centre of the site looking to the east, and that's the woodland belt that surrounds the site. This is the centre of the site looking north, so you can see how well screened the site is from existing established landscaping. This is the centre of the site looking west towards the paddocks. This is the stables, just here. This is the riding arena that I previously referred to. So the application site includes part of this, and it's approximately in this position that the allocation site extends up to. So this area is included it. That's what part of the site that you're considering, and again, part of it is outside of that allocation. But again, as I said previously, it's not with any landscape designation. This is the field access gate. Now, the access is proposed off to the right-hand side of this, further away, so it's not proposed to use this access. The new access onto the lane will come further off to the right. And this is looking west along George Street with the site on the right-hand side of the photograph. In terms of the proposed day room, these are the dimensions, the details of the day room, a utility room, shower room and WC. In terms of elevational treatment, timber boarding and a plinth, just front and rear elevations. And then in terms of the side elevation. The key issues are set out in the report, with part of the site, as I've said, laying within the emerging local plan allocation and partly outside of this allocation. Notwithstanding this and acknowledging the weight to be attached to emerging policy DM15 and the fact that the site lies outside any local plan landscape designations, given the established screening around the site, the relatively sustainable location of the site in close proximity to Staplehurst village, and there are good connections across the railway line to the north of the village, the lack of harm arising from the development and the acceptance of the next door site for a permanent G&T site. Now, taking all these factors into consideration, the proposals comply with the emerging local plan policy DM15, and as such the application is recommended for permission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. First and foremost, members, can you declare any lobbying, please? Let's... Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Right, I now go over to the speakers for this, and Councillor Burnham of Staplehurst Parish Council.
Right, Chairman, Councillors, although, as the officer said, the emerging local plan does identify George Street, Staplehurst, as a possible location for additional gypsy and traveller pitches, Staplehurst Parish Council doesn't consider that the George Street area is appropriate for this or indeed any other form of new residential development. We have two main concerns over this: flooding and the road and pedestrian access. As local residents are all too well aware, both George Street and Clapper Lane, which joins onto George Street at its western end and is not far from this site, are prone to surface water flooding. And in wet weather, it's not unusual for both George Street and Clapper Lane to be impassable at their junctions with the A229. The whole area is drained by a complex network of ditches and channels that feed into the river belt about a mile to the east. We'd have concerns both about faster runoff of water from areas of hard standing and also about the effect of even a small additional load of sewage treatment effluent, nitrate and phosphate, on the river belt, which is a site of special scientific interest. And should you approve the application, we think both these aspects should be controlled by stringent conditions. It's true that the site is only 660 metres from Staplehurst Station, but this involves the use of an unlit and unsignalled footpath level crossing over a busy mainline electrified railway, followed by nearly 300 metres of boggy unlit footpath to reach the station approach road. I don't believe that this route would be safe for children or for parents with pushchairs, especially after dark, and this view was supported by the inspector when dismissing an appeal on the refusal of another application a little way along George Street. The alternative longer route involves nearly 400 metres of George Street, which is at this point a single-track lane with no lights or footway before you reach the footway along the A229, and the verges are muddy ruts. Staplehurst School and the health centre are more than 2 kilometres from the site, even using the potentially dangerous level crossing, and avoiding the level crossing adds to the distance. The nearest bus stop is 750 metres using the level crossing and a kilometre by road. Thus, although this site may appear to be close to the facilities of Staplehurst, the reality on the ground is that almost all journeys will be made by car, and so we don't believe the site can be regarded as sustainable. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Councillor Perry.
Good evening, members, Chairman. The report states that this is a speculative application and actually represents further planned expansion. This is effectively a new site, which is not in a local plan. It is also, in my view, contravenes the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan adopted by Maidstone Borough Council. For example, para 4.16 defines the northern edge of the envelope being the railway line. This, in fact, enshrines what has been established de facto practice for a number of years, has been supported by a number of appeal decisions. Policy PW3 of the plan states that installations should be sensitive to existing communities. This is a new site on expanded land, and given what has happened a short distance away, will not meet the policy criteria in the neighbourhood plan. The report argues that the proposed development would not result in cumulative impact sufficient to warrant refusal of the application. I strongly disagree. We have recently seen activity taking place just round the corner that required a court injunction to prevent the activity continuing, and the end result was the loss of many trees and what was once grazing and woodland now looking like a reenactment of a scene from the Battle of Passchendaele. A very different scene from the series of bucolic photographs you've just been shown. There's now clear evidence that this whole area has been targeted for expansion, and its potential cumulative effect must be taken into account. Otherwise, what has happened at Maplehurst down the road will just be repeated here. I consider that the following must be taken into account. It does not comply with either ENV 28 or SP 17 of the Emerging Local Plan. It does not have excellent access to local facilities, as the report implies. The lane is unpaved, so walking to the 229 would be very, very difficult and not a practical option. The only realistic route has just been described, which would involve the use of an unmanned level crossing and a muddy footpath. And this was confirmed by an appeal decision for development in George Street, where the inspector, in dismissing the appeal, noted neither the level crossing nor the footpath provides an attractive or realistic route to the station or the village. I believe this application should be refused on the following grounds. This application does not meet criteria set out in policy DM15. It is not sustainable. It contravenes policy NV 28 and policy SP 17, which must be applied consistently. There's no direct access to this site, so a new access would need to be created on what is a very narrow country lane. It represents development north of the railway line, and therefore contravenes the adopted Staplewood Nasal Plan and established practice, which must be applied consistently to all communities. It is not included in the emerging local plan, and the Council can demonstrate that it already has more than a 5-year supply of pitches, so there is absolutely no need to accept what the report admits to be a speculative application. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members.
Thank you. No need for clapping, please. Thank you, Councillor Perry. Right, we have one speaker, Councillor Borton. I noticed another hand's gone up. Can we start with Councillor Borton, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I was struck by, I wasn't actually planning to speak on this, and then I was struck by something that the Parish Council said and then that Councillor Perry reiterated about the sustainability of this site, and particularly with regards to an appeal on George Street to an application there about the footpath, because look, I don't know Staplehurst terribly well. I'll be the first to admit that. It's not the neck of the woods which I'm from, but ordinarily living 660 metres away from a railway station would make that sustainable and possible. But if, as has been described, the footpath is in the condition and it has been referenced by an inspector in a planning appeal decision already, that would, to me, throw the sustainability of this site up in the air. So I was just wondering whether the officers would be able to perhaps comment on that specific point, because to me, irrespective of the issues about the cumulative effect, which I think is a slightly separate issue which I've got concerns about, to me that's absolutely key as to whether this is actually sustainable or not.
Thank you. I'll ask our officers to answer that first before I'll ask Councillor Harwood to come in.
By their very nature, the final draft policy DM15 does allow G&T sites in the countryside. They accept on that basis that by being located in the countryside, they're not going to be located in the existing settlements. So inherently, and you'll see in lots of decisions in Maplehurst Lanes, I can refer to example, in Parkwood Stables, where inspectors have concluded, in general, the site is relatively sustainable. Now, on that basis, you've got a site here where you can see straight access onto George Street, comes straight down into the level crossing. You've got a public right-of-way that runs right along the side of this railway, and then you've got the village right over here. So in terms of sustainability, I would call this probably one of the most sustainable sites that we have in the village, apart from some of those sites that we've got that are public sites. But notwithstanding that, you've also got 2 allocated sites right in this location that went through a very thorough and rigorous local plan process which accepted the sustainability of those sites. So in terms of where you are in terms of sustainability of this site, you've got these 2 sites which have been allocated, been through that rigorous process, found to be acceptable in their location. They have to go through a strategic sustainability appraisal when you allocate sites in the local plan. So they've been through quite a thorough process in terms of your question on sustainability. So to answer my question, that process has been carried out on the allocation, and I think if members came forward to say that the site was unsustainable in that location, it would be an extremely, very, very extremely difficult argument to argue on the basis of the allocations right next door and the allocation at Bluebell Farm, and given the fact that they've got access to George Street straight to a crossing. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Borton, do you want to come back?
Yeah, what about the specific point, though, that the Parish Council made about the appeal and the ability of George Street to sort of cope with any additional development there? Because I've not seen the appeal that was referred to. I've not read the document. What precisely does it say?
I mean, firstly, I haven't got that detail in front of me, and neither have members in terms of the detail. I've previously turned around to you and said, in terms of appeals are material, but obviously I would suggest that's for a housing development. I don't know, it may or may not be, but that's not in front of members. What the question that I got answered in terms of is this a sustainable location. The fact that there are allocated sites that are in the local plan that we're hopefully just about to adopt indicate that that is a sustainable location. And I've shown you in terms of the accessibility down to the village. So I would regard that as being sustainable.
I'm going to ask Councillor Harwood to come. I've got several speakers, but Councillor Harwood was next.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm always struck that George Street is a remarkable survival. I mean, it really does retain its old-fashioned Wealden landscape. And when you walk along it, even though it is close to the edge of Staplehurst, I think the fact that it's over the railway, the fact that it is so wet and marshy and full of ponds and great crested newts, certainly a pond jammed with great crested newts within 50 metres of this site, you can see it on the drawing. So I think that would require an up-to-date ecological survey, which is one small point. But there is a bigger point here, and I think it is the rural character. We've jealously guarded that. We recently won the residential appeal. We fought and won other appeals, and we fought and lost appeals for both houses and Gypsy and Traveller applications. There was a balancing act in place when the two allocations were put in terms of where they were located, their spacing, and what George Street could sustain without undermining its very attractive rural character. I suggest that just because it's in an area where there have been allocations does not mean you can fill in the gaps, because that's a very slippery slope. If we had residential allocations and we say, oh, well, there's several residential allocations in Sutton Road, let's build along the whole Sutton Road. I mean, give it time. But that is not the way that planning should work. And I think we are at about the maximum of the development that George Street can take, either settled or Gypsy and Traveller, without fundamentally changing that rural character. So I suggest that the grounds for refusal here would be that it's in the open countryside, contrary to current ENV 28 of the borough-wide local plan and SB 17 the developing local plan. But I think the devil is in the detail. If we were to refuse, we need to speak in some depth about the aesthetics and the quality of George Street, and that would be undermined and lost if we have this incremental creep of ribbon development along the lane. So, I'll kind of leave that hanging, but I think in this case there is a real issue, and I really do think that since the historic ecological survey that's talked about was carried out in a slightly different area, this site has returned much more to nature. It's now tall rough grass with hawthorns in it. It's right next to ponds. We all remember the Tesco's application and all of the European protected species that came out of that. This is a site that I don't think we can just lose it without a fight.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. I'm assuming Councillor Prendergast wants to actually second your proposal. Did you have a proposal, Councillor Harwood?
Yeah. It was on the countryside and the landscape protection policies. However, I do think this is a case where we need a paragraph underneath talking about the rural character of George Street and that incremental growth undermining that rural character.
If that is the case, I will allow officers to draft words appropriately with the legal officers.
And I also think there's that issue about having no up-to-date ecological survey on the site.
Sorry, Councillor Harwood, could you just make clear your proposal, please?
Right. That we refuse this application because it is in the open countryside and is contrary to Mason Borough-wide local plan policy ENV 28 and evolving local plan policy SP 17, and it is not an allocated site within the local plan and would lead to an erosion of the intimate rural character which defines George Street, and that needs to be developed, I think, a little bit as appropriate, and in a site which has proven records for European protected species, namely great crested newt. We do not have an up-to-date ecological survey nor mitigation plan, which would be required for a development where there is a potential impact upon European protected species.
I'll ask officers to come back, then I'll be asking Councillor Prendergast to follow through.
Right. I will come back and ask members for further detail in terms of this character, in terms of the George Street, because I'm going to refer members to an application that was refused some time ago, Little Bowden, which members may well remember, which was refused by members of the committee. The appeal hearing was heard very recently. It was an allocated site in the draft local plan, final draft local plan. The inspector overturned that recommendation and improved it, and we've just got a request for a cost award on that recommendation, which we're currently reviewing. Now, what the inspector said on that particular point is that due regard had not been given by the council. And I will add, at the moment, there isn't a cost award. The inspector is considering that, but the request that we have to respond back to is that the inspector considers that due regard wasn't given to the allocation in the final draft of the local plan and the weight that was to be attached to that. So we have to respond back to that because it was an allocated site. Now, the same principles must apply to this site because you've got an allocated site right next door. Part of this application includes that site area within it. It's not within a landscape designation, and therefore on that basis, if members are going to refuse it, firstly, you've got to have regard and pay the weight to the DM15 policy, and I would request that I'll take members through that DM15 policy because some of it says, and that was amended by the inspector, at significant landscape harm in the inspector's modified version. It refers to existing screening around the site, which this has got. It refers to a whole list of criteria. So members would have to demonstrate, because that policy carries almost full weight in terms of the local plan. So members are going to have to turn around and turn their mind to how this fails to comply with that emerging policy. And the reasons why I've said the Little Bowden cost issue coming forward is on the basis that you're going to have regard to the allocation and the difference between what this site, allocating part of that, and what the allocated site allows for in its expansion. So I would just ask members to consider those matters because at the moment, whilst Councillor Harwood has given some quite detailed, I haven't had a fully justified where the harm to George Street is occurring in this instance. So I would request that a much greater level of detail is provided and also you take account of those other matters on DM15 where, in terms of how it doesn't comply. Thank you very much, Mr Chairman.
Thank you. There are several speakers. Unless Councillor Harwood wants to come back, I think you want to be formally seconded by Councillor Prendergast.
I mean, very quickly, I think that Mr Bailey has put his finger on what the difference is here. The other site was allocated site. Well, it wasn't. It was in the evolving plan. It was allocated. This is not an allocated site. And when we allocate sites, as I say, you overcome the countryside protection policies because gypsy and traveller sites are usually in the countryside, but we need to retain that rural feel. So therefore, having enclaves within the countryside is very different from joining in the gaps in between and getting a bigger settlement. So I think that's the argument we need to use, is that the allocations were very carefully framed so that it retains that rural countryside feel, whereas if you have incremental creep beyond the allocated sites, you will undermine the character, and because of its proximity to Staplehurst Village, it will very quickly become urbanised.
Thank you, Councillor Harwood. as chair, I'm just going to interlope because I know my fellow ward member also wants to mention it, but you are speaking from my heart too in that latter statement. Over to you, Councillor Prendergast.
Mr Bailey, you know that I am feeling extremely bruised this week following that appeal decision, and I was going to keep quiet, but I'm not, because Councillor Harwood has taken the words out of my mouth again. This is not a site that we have identified in the local plan. This is a speculative development, and any further... I know this area really well. I know it extremely well. And any further development there, whether it's for the settled community or the travelling community, we will change the face of the rural landscape there. Had this been one of the allocated sites in the local plan, I would have been zipped tonight. I would have been. But this is, we're just going to be adding to the harm to the countryside if we allow this, especially as it is a speculative development. I don't think we can use that local plan argument in this case, because that surely is part of our strategic thinking, strategic policies to identify sites and allocate them to the local plan. This isn't. So I don't think that's an argument.
Thank you. And there are several other speakers, so I shall start with Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I just have the clarification again of exactly what proportion of this site falls outside the land allocated under GT 110? Excellent, thank you, because I don't have that in front of me. Okay. Oh, sorry.
In terms of where we're looking at here, you'll see in terms of the paddocks area extends up to here. Now, as I previously referred to the sand school, so this area is part of the allocation. So if I take you back to here, so it's approximately, the scan school's in this area here, so it's approximately, I'd say, this area along here. If I'm using a guesstimation, I would guesstimate in terms of maybe a quarter or a third of the site in terms of where it sways over. So that's my rough estimation of how it plays over.
Is it particularly pertinent because we do have other speakers?
Very much to this. Can you just assure me that that drawing has not got a north on it? Therefore, we're comparing something that is north on our papers, and that is a very sad drawing that hasn't got the orientation correct. Because I'm looking at one here, and therefore you can't show where from the aerial view, we've got that, is it a menage, the circle of sand? Thank you. It's close. And I'm just saying that that drawing is orientated incorrectly. So we're having one view that we're looking at here, and it doesn't correlate to what we're seeing on there.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. I'm going to ask officers to respond to that before I ask Councillor Burton to respond back, although I know I have other speakers.
Yeah, I mean, obviously on your papers, page 3, you have a correctly orientated plan, which obviously, so if you turn that around, obviously it hasn't got a north point. If you turned it around clockwise, then obviously, but in terms of the area that I'm giving you, it's approximately, as I said, in that area along there that's part of the allocation. It also, the allocation extends out over this way as well. So in terms of extends the other side, in terms of northwards of the paddocks, with that plan that you've seen going around the room.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Councillor Burton to respond back to that point that he did make, and then I will ask Councillors Mumford and Powell to come back after that.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll try and be as brief as possible on this. Thank you for clarifying that, because the drawings that I had seen previously made it seem like there was a lot more of the application site, and I'm not sure whether that was just me misreading what was in front of me. We're between a little bit of a rock and a hard place if we're trying to dismiss this, refuse this application on the basis of the harm at the site of itself, because it's a fairly even proportion between what's outside of what we've allocated and what's in what we've allocated. So I think just when we're talking about the wording of this possible refusal, we ought to be very mindful of the point that Mr. Bailey has tried to make about the previous inspector's decisions in, was it in Headcorn, wherever it was, because there is an element of, well, we've looked at this area and declared it sustainable for a G&T site. So if it's 5 metres that way, do we really have grounds to say, well, it's not sustainable? I hope that made some sense. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go firstly over to Councillor Powell and then Councillor Mumford.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there's been a lot said about this application already tonight, and certainly the previous 2 applications, actually. I think what Councillor Harwood actually said earlier on is actually spot on. That again was verified by Councillor Prendergast. We heard 2 extremely good talks tonight, certainly from the Staplehurst Parish Council and then from Councillor Perry, giving all sorts of reasons why this application should be turned down. My real concern tonight is that, and I'm going to point this at the officers, are trying to move the goalpost to justify recommendation for accepting kind of applications, and I don't think that's fair on this committee. But equally, I think we've got more than enough to go on, and I'm going to leave that to somebody more articulate than myself this evening, Councillor Harwood, to take those proposals forward for us to reject this application. Thank you.
Councillor Mumford.
I take Mr. Bailey's point about we've got to take account for the other sites, but I think what Councillor Harwood was saying was an accumulative effect along George Street. So we are taking account that all of these other sites are going to come on board, so that's where we take account of it. In my DM15, it says that local services, in particular school, health, shopping, are accessible on foot, cycle or public transport. Now, I've got an inspector saying the route you've described is not safe, or words to that effect, which would actually be the last thing that's said, because we allocated those sites long before that inspector made that judgment. So that brings the allocated sites into question. And the one thing that we have not spoken about, and I'm sure Councillor Perry will remind us, but he came up where this site allocation was contravening the neighbourhood plan, which I think we should include in any objection that we make.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give officers a chance to respond.
Chairman, if a very valid point has been raised by Councillor Burton and indeed Councillor Mumford, that I think the point here is that we've got encroachment beyond the allocated site into the important gap area of open countryside, and that's what we need to articulate, that we've got this creep, yes, a small part of the site, and if this application was all within the allocated site, we would have no choice but to permit it. It's because we've got that expansion beyond it, you then encroach upon the all-important gaps. And the point that Mr. Bailey made about, well, what's it doing to the character of George Street? Well, the character of George Street is rural and archetypically Wealden. If you erode the gaps between the settlements, whether they be settled or whether they be transient gypsy and traveller sites, you undermine the overall quality. So if we can try and capture that, it would be, I think, very helpful to any future appeal.
As I said earlier, I fully empathise with all your points, and in that respect, I'm going to go for a small adjournment purely and only because I'm going to ask the proposer and seconder to come over here and we'll work out grounds for refusal. Having said that, before we do that, I will ask the officers to come in first before we have that small adjournment.
I can see where members are going with this debate. I just want to appraise members that a lot of discussion has been said to say it's not an allocated site. Refer you to page 50 of the Inspector's report, members. It says that we're, in terms of our allocation in our emerging local plan, we were 33 pitches short. So on that basis, over the planned period, members, you cannot rely on your allocation G&T sites to deliver your need for gypsy and travellers in the locality. So on that basis, you will have to rely on, and you have approved the issues in terms of windfall sites coming forward that won't be allocated, and I've previously said to you, you'll be able to pick and choose those sites. I have specifically said that where there isn't, and I refer back to what the policy says, significant landscape harm, because that's what the policy now says. The development would not result in significant harm to the landscape and rural character, and in terms of then it has to go through those existing features. So I would just, when we discuss those ground of refusals, I would ask the proposer seconder to see, because what I don't want to do is fall into the little Bowden trap, not give due weight to the DM15 policy, and not give due weight to the site immediately allocated next door. So when we have that discussion, I would just ask the proposer and seconder to frame those grounds under those matters. Thank you, Chairman.
I see that before we do actually move ahead, we've got several more speakers that wish to come up, so I'll ask Councillor Cox to start.
Thank you very much. I'll be as quick as possible. Can I ask Mr Bailey whether or not he pointed out this horse exercising area because it was in the previous site as GT110, and therefore would an inspector say that you're not actually using that section of GT10 and therefore it could compensate for the additional area that you're now using outside that area, but the new area will be for 2 actual caravans? So did you point that out specifically for that reason? Did I pick that up because I was supposed to, or that you just mentioned there was a nice place to rest your horses?
Not intentionally, it's just to give members an idea in terms of what's on the site. There's an exercise area that's outside the outside the site area, and it's just to give you members a sort of an idea in a rough approximation of where the extent of the allocated site stops. And you know, as I said, we've had these issues on many times in terms of densities, in terms of that they're illustrative, in terms of other areas. So, and in terms of allocations, they do slightly change when we move forward in terms of the application. So I'm just saying they are general advice that I've consistently given to members in terms of density and allocations. You know, they give an indication, but what members would need to consider, as I said, in terms of harm issues and the difference between those two, which Councillor Harwood has given some grounds previously.
Councillor Cox, do you want to come back?
Yeah, the reason why I asked that is because the officers must have weighed something up to change their mind from what we're now building, or they must have looked at how could we come at a ground for refusal, and you must have said, well, I can't see one, so therefore we're accepting and approving this. So I was asking that, offering you a lifeline, saying, do you think an inspector would say, well, if we look at it on balance, the amount of area that has been used of the countryside is actually being used to exercise horses, it's not being used to put gypsy pitches on, so therefore that's what I was asking. Are you offsetting it and saying that an inspector might do that? And he'd say, well, I'm going to allow this because that part of that allocated site is not actually being used for the pitches.
Very quickly, I think the inspector will look at harm and he'll look at the next door site. He won't just suddenly see an arbitrary line. He'll say, what's the difference between, if I'm honest, that site that was allocated in landscape terms and that site right next door? Where is the harm arising from that? Because it's already been accepted as sustainable. If that's where I'm drawing my issue. That's how I think the inspector will clearly look at this application.
Again, I have more speakers wishing. Did I see Councillor Clark wishing to say something?
Thank you, Chairman. I think the clear message that's coming from this committee, from all those that have spoken, is this sense of aggregated harm, the fill-in, the impact that is developing beyond the local plan site, where we went to those hearings, we worked out where we wanted our sites, and sometimes we were arguing about where things were with relation to footpaths and subtle indicators on the landscape. My concern is that, yes, we may be short of the number of allocated gypsy and traveller sites beyond 30, but is this the place to continually add, or should we be looking somewhere else where we can have an equal level of mitigated harm that we're trying to achieve as a committee on this site? I take the point that it's in an area where an allocation has happened, but if we start to push the boundaries, looking at the site, if you go so far to the east, you could almost just as easily cross the road or go all the way round the site and push the boundaries. I feel that unless anyone wants to speak against the viewpoint, I feel this committee is saying we're taking some level of harm, we are spacing it out, we're giving breathing space along this lane to keep the rural nature. If there are other sites to be found, we need to look elsewhere. I think that's what's coming across quite loud and clear.
I think the message is becoming fairly clear. There's a number of speakers that did stick up their hand and have now subsequently withdrawn. Councillor Mumford, did you still want to say something?
Yes, very quickly, just to bring the officer's comments into context. Yeah, we've got a 5.6-year supply. We have got allocated sites and we are 33 short. We can't guess what a review would say, but we've got 14 years to select those 33 sites, and should we be taking inappropriate ones that don't fit, in our mind, the criteria? 14 years.
Well said, Councillor Mumford, because if somebody hadn't else have said it, I would have said exactly that. Is there anybody else that wishes to speak on this before I have a slight adjournment to correctly word these issues? No? Okay, I'm going to now ask a formal 5-minute adjournment. It may be slightly longer. Ladies and gentlemen, because of the delicacy of the wording, we are having a full adjournment now for 15 minutes. So if you wish to go for further breaks or a comfort break, please do so. Right, ladies and gentlemen, can we resume? Are we all in attendance? Yes, I believe we are. Right, on the basis of that adjournment and assessing wording, we have now agreed a wording, and I'm going to ask the officer to read it out.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the ground that's been put forward by the proposer and the seconder is the proposal by virtue of the significant harm to the rural character of this low-wheeled country lane arising from the encroachment and creation of the new access point, hard-standing areas and domestic paraphernalia into an important landscape space between allocated and residential sites, in brackets both settled and gypsy and travellers, close brackets, would erode the rural character of the locality, contrary to policies EMV 28 of the adopted Local Plan 2000 and emerging policies DM 15 and SP 17 of the final draft Local Plan, and policies PW2 of the Staplehurst Neighbourhood Plan. Ground 2, the lack of an up-to-date information in respect of protected species, specifically great crested newts, means there is insufficient evidence to ensure there will be no harm caused to protected species, and this would be contrary to policies DM3, DM15 of the final draft Local Plan, the Natural England Standing Advice, Circular 06/2005, and paragraph 118 of the MPPF.
Excuse me, we're just passing that over to the legal officers and the democratic officers. Right, generally, gentlemen, ladies, are we all agreed? Can I take that to the vote? Anybody wants to say anything further before I go to the vote? No? I will go to the vote. We are now voting with grounds to refusal to refuse this application. Those in favour of refusing this application? That again is a unanimous vote. Right, ladies and gentlemen, we move over to the next agenda item. First and foremost, I will ask ladies and gentlemen present, have you been lobbied on this? That is land rear of Chart View off Chart Hill Road, Chart Sutton, Kent. I believe that's everybody bar Councillor Booten. And Spooner. Wharton and Spooner haven't. Yeah. Right, we've had a few more departures. We'll just let it all settle down, and now we'll hand over to the officers to actually give us the background on this application.
Thank you, Chair. This is another Gypsy and Traveller application for two Gypsy families with a static home, touring caravans, amenity buildings and land of hard standing, along with a new access at land rear of Chart View off Chart Hill Road, Chart Sutton. There is an urgent update for this application, which you've probably got in front of you, but essentially the main headlines are the location plan has been amended, as the lane to the Chart Hill Road is private, so the red line has been amended to access onto essentially to Chart Hill to the west, and the relevant certificates will be served on the owners. The update is to, if was to be approved, given delegated powers to allow such a notice to be served and the requisite consultation period to be taken forward prior to any decision being made. There's been other representations regarding the access and rights of way, but obviously rights of way and access are a civil matter as long as the requisite notices are served, that the proper procedures are followed. And then a further email was received this afternoon, essentially raising concerns about contrary to policy and landscape harm and cumulative effect of gypsy and traveller sites. But the issues raised in that email have been addressed in the report in any case. So moving on to the actual development itself, the site here is in red. Sorry, skip forward. To the east here is a gypsy and traveller site that was approved in 2011, and similar to the one we were just discussing, there is an allocated site here to the northwest, which is allocated in the final draft plan. The site would be accessed off this private lane to the south onto Chart Hill Road. There's an aerial photo. You can see the gypsy and traveller site there, and then obviously this plot's up here to the northeast, and then road up here, the main road. Just got some photos here to show you the context of the site. This is a view looking west along the access lane with the site boundary on the right-hand side here. That's a good photo. But essentially it's the access to the public footpath that essentially runs across the site from the southwest to the northeast here. So that's the access to that. That is in the site looking across to the northeast from the southeast corner, looking towards you can see the approved gypsy site in the backdrop. That's looking north from the southern boundary, and that's looking west for the boundary with Little Rabbits and that boundary of the site. There's some other photos internally within the site. So there's obviously the utility day room that's approved, the post and rail fencing. And here's probably the most important plan, this layout plan where you'll see the two mobile homes laid out to the south of the site with the utility buildings, with proposed landscaping around the boundaries. And you'll see the public footpath is quite helpfully marked on there that travels diagonally across the north of the site. So essentially, again, like the previous application, it's been assessed against the final draft policy, having regard to decisions made by the Council in respect of the site to the east and the allocation to the north-west in terms of sustainability and landscape considerations. From a landscape perspective, the boundary screening is pretty comprehensive along the southern boundary and to the west, and it was considered proposed landscaping to the boundaries can mitigate any views from the footpath, and it was considered on that basis that the proposals meet the criteria of DM15 and will contribute to the supply of gypsy sites within the borough. So the recommendation, obviously, just to reiterate, it's a speculative application, so it's a proposal that hasn't taken place. So there'd be a condition restricting the use of the site to gypsy and travellers only. Yes, and the approval subject to conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wynne. Ladies and gentlemen, we have no speakers. However, we do have a ward member, so I shall ask Councillor Mumford to start. Oh, sorry. Have I done it? I'm lobbying. Yeah. Carry on, Steve.
Yeah, I got a phone call from Councillor Waring this afternoon. He was delayed at work. He cannot make it. We also had an objector fall out yesterday through personal circumstances. Anyway, on with the application. The parish council called it in, and they'd like us to decide it. As you can see from the urgent update, it's got to go back out to public consultation for 21 days. So the public are going to be consulted for 21 days. We're being asked to give delegated powers to grant planning permission. I'm not prepared to give delegated powers to grant the permission. I'm wondering why they ask it, even though they haven't heard the consultation. So I'm moving that we defer this until that consultation is completed, and that's what I'm moving.
I see we have at least two people wishing to second that. I'll ask Councillor Prendergast first.
Well, if it hasn't gone out to consultation, we don't have the views of residents and the parish council, so we need to defer it. So I second Councillor Mumford on that one.
I'll also ask Councillor Harwood to have his say, and then I'll ask officers to come back.
I just agree that we have to take into account all evidence to make a decision, and until we have, there might be some local information that we're not aware of, and they are entitled to that consultation. It's only one cycle, so I don't see an issue.
Officers.
Just one point to raise. I accept what members are requesting. Obviously, the consultation is to include that private road in the certification in the red line boundary. So what they would do is serve a notice. If they don't know the owner of that land, they'll serve notice under certificate D, C or D, and they'd put it in the paper. So in effect, obviously, the owner of that road could comment on it, but that becomes a civil matter. I totally appreciate what members are saying, but it's a civil matter, not a planning matter in terms of ownership of land. So I'm just getting members to be aware of that situation, that even if there were a deferment on that, and let's say the person who owned the road objected to it, you couldn't take that effectively into account because it would be a civil matter, not a planning matter for them to progress. So, but I appreciate what members have proposed.
I take it, Councillor Mumford, do you want to come back?
Yeah, I'm aware that it's a civil matter. However, in the sort of spirit of transparency, and you also, in the urgent update, talk about procedures, etc., we should go through that process, and the residents should see that they're being heard and considered.
Hang on a second, I just want to consult with both legal officers and planning officers. It is agreed that we can defer on that basis, Councillor Mumford. I therefore put that to the vote, ladies and gentlemen. Are you all agreed to defer this item? Unanimous. I believe that's a unanimous decision. Yes, for one cycle only.
Can I just...
Karen.
I just need to double check the one cycle, because the issue is if it's an unknown owner, they have to publish a notice in the paper, not that they just serve notice on the owner. That creates a time delay, so I would request not a cycle turnaround. It's effectively till the expiry of the publicity on the advert, if so required, and we bring it back after that expires. It's just unknown at this stage, so...
On the basis of the officer's recommendations, I think we can purely say deferred to be heard at the earliest opportunity. We all agreed? Agreed. Thank you, officers and members. Right, we now move on to the next application, page 117 in the papers. Can I first and foremost ask for lobbying on the matter? I'll take the lead. There's only that seems to be only 3 of us that have been lobbied. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, on this particular issue, as you will be aware, one uses one's rights every now and again as chair and vice chair. And we did request the officers to provide further evidence in terms of environmental health officers' information. And sadly, that information that we have asked for will be forthcoming, but it cannot be forthcoming on this particular occasion. They have expressed a desire to attend the event at the adjourned meeting the following Thursday, where they will be able to make any environmental health justification. Now, on the basis of that, I'm offering it to members to either hear it today or put it on next week's adjourned agenda. I ask officers to... Right. I do have written proposals, as I've just been advised, to that effect. Councillor Borton, you did in fact call this in. Would you like to make any statement before I ask for it to be adjourned to that moment, that meeting?
All I'd say, Mr. Chair, is I'd support your view that it be adjourned to next week, because I think this is in effect an environmental health issue. That's the basis of my call-in, and I think it would be incredibly... I think we've got to have an environmental health officer here to do so. So if they can come next week, that would be preferable.
Does anybody else wish to say anything on the matter?
I totally agree with Councillor Bolton on it. It makes sense.
Effectively, we are agreeing a deferment then. Do officers wish to say? Adjournment, sorry.
No, Chair. As I said, we've got comments from the officer here if you wanted to hear it from an email form, but if you're going to adjourn it, we'll make sure he comes next Thursday.
Thank you. I'd particularly like to thank officers in this respect, because it was as a result of the actual chair and myself in a meeting earlier requesting this, and officers have bent over backwards to help us in this respect, and I really do want it to be recorded that officers genuinely have tried, and I thank officers on that point. We look forward to discussing this at the next meeting. On that basis, I go on to the next item on the agenda, 28A High Street Headcorn. Page 79, Agenda 19. Can you all declare whether you have or have not been lobbied members on this? As a ward member, I certainly have. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, we're just confirming who was lobbied and who wasn't. Right, I think we've got that right. Yeah. Right, I move over to the officers now.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for change of use of Class A1 retail to use of premises as a tallying salon, which is a sui generis use, so it's got a sort of a mixed use to it. So this is the travel agent shop. It's currently vacant and has been vacant for a time. It's a Grade 2 listed building. There are no works proposed externally or internally apart from the removal of a more modern partition. Obviously, any works that would be required internally in terms of structural alterations would require a listed building consent. Just a couple of things to point out in terms of tallying salon. Whilst the application is as a sui generis use, its use is very similar to a use as a hairdresser or such like. You know, it provides a service, a trade, it sells certain products in the window. Obviously, you're not considering any advertisement consent that may go up, and you're certainly not considering any external alterations to the building. So it is purely a use which has a use similar to one of the uses I've just described. So just going through some of the photographs, I know the Chairman will know the High Street particularly well. Just going through some of the photographs, there are a range of facilities and services and shops in the High Street. This is the existing building. So in terms of where I previously referred to existing, proposed, it removes that little partition, which is a modern addition. So in terms of internal, external works, there's hardly anything proposed. In terms of vitality and viability, obviously the shop is empty at the moment. It doesn't contribute to the vitality and viability of the High Street. In terms of listed building consent, section 66(1) of the Act, one of the primary functions is to try to find uses for listed buildings. So in terms of when you have uses for listed buildings, then obviously that pays for their maintenance and upkeep. So it's important that our heritage assets are used to that extent so they can be managed and maintained. In terms of the principal concerns, I think they've raised by the Parish Council, I think they're set out in your urgent update report, the concerns about the opening hours in terms of the proposed use, and that's set out in your report. And there were concerns about noise transmissions to the upper floor flats. Now, obviously your Environmental Health Officer has commented on the application. What I wouldn't be suggesting or recommending is large areas of noise transmission on a listed building, because that can affect the integrity of the building, but notwithstanding that, the HO officer has not raised comment or objection on that point. With regard to the opening hours, obviously businesses need to sustain themselves. They go later on into the evening. The hours that are set out on your officer's report aren't excessive. There are other shops in the High Street that extend quite a bit past those issues, and obviously, as we're all aware, you know, economic viability and sustainability of shops, they're having to extend opening hours. So if members were mindful to impose the hours that the Parish Council are suggesting, you would have to then take into account whether they're reasonable and they meet the tests, taking into account those other shops in the High Street who have further extensions on their hours than the ones currently proposed. So would it be reasonable to restrict those hours? So on that basis, and due to the increased viability of the High Street by this use, and for it to be put towards a building, a sustainable use for the building, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I'm now going to move over to our speakers on this. We have a local resident. Mr. Khan, would you like to come up to the stage? Come up and speak?
Mr. Chairman, members, first of all, I'm not a local resident. I'm the person who owns most of the large building, of which this is only 10%. And it's not a flat. It is a large residence. The application submitted is a seriously deceptive document which misleads us to a number of important issues. Unfortunately, the case officer in his planning committee report both accepts many of the wrong statements and even reinforces some of them. I have described the various misstatements in my written submission, which has been ignored in the case report, and in an email to committee members, and trust that they take full note of the contents. Some of the points are also mentioned by the latest input from the Parish Council. This evening I want to concentrate on two essential elements, namely fire hazard and noise pollution and their consequences. The unit concerned is largely directly under one of my bedrooms, which I use as an office. There is a legal obligation for any business situated under a residential property to have a fire-resistant ceiling giving up to 1 hour retardation. To install this in a listed building will require listed building consent. This has not been sought, and evidently the applicants do not intend to do this. None of the council officials involved have apparently taken note of this, and though raised by me, the report ignores the issue. I've made inquiries as to the noise generated in the tanning salon. When operating, the beds make a continuous noise like a motor running. Considerable heat is generated, in itself a concern, so noisy fans are always installed. Music is, it seems, invariably played. The ceiling above the unit is no more than my floorboards. This is clearly visible from the street. I can even hear slight sounds in the unit underneath. Nevertheless, the case officer, who has not been in my premises or consulted me, and does not seem to have considered the above factors, does not hesitate to say that, quote, local residents will not suffer any further significant harm in terms of general noise and disturbance. According to the case officer, the environmental health officer, who has not visited the site, raises no objections and shows no evidence of having considered the noise and heat generated by the equipment used. With regret, I'm forced to think in terms of negligence in the performance of duty. This is a valid, valuable listed building. It will require listed consent both for a ceiling to retard fire and to prevent objectionable noise. You may consider matters of high prevention building regulations, protection of listed properties and disturbance of residential amenities are not the concern of your committee and will have to be pursued later in other forums. However, this is a case where some joined-up thinking is appropriate. It should be obvious that the proposed application is not only unsuited to Headcorn High Street and the building concerned, but it will eventually fail due to the numerous defects and even illegalities contained in the proposal.
Can I draw a conclusion to that? And thank you very much. You've had your 3 minutes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. I'll now ask the representative of Headcorn Parish Council, Councillor Pyman.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. Headcorn Parish Council received the Development Manager's recommendations for this application and it reads, application permitted. The matter was reviewed by Council at planning meeting earlier this week, and although in overall support of the occupation of an empty unit on the High Street, they feel that the officer's report does not accurately reflect its situation. They would therefore ask you to consider the following points. Number one, extended open hours proposed by Maidstone Borough Council is at odds with Headcorn Parish Council and the applicant themselves. Number two, the report did not properly reflect the objections and concerns to this application. Number three, the unit in question has no fire retardant ceiling and would be required by law in commercial buildings with a residential unit over it. Any construction in this regard would require listed building consent, as this property is both in a conservation area and Grade 2 listed. Point number four. At 250 metres square, this unit is approximately 10% of the total area of the property and could not therefore be considered to be incidental. Number five, no consideration has been given to the soundproofing within the ceiling formed by the floorboards of the residential unit above. The noise of the clients, etc., could be disruptive to the resident, especially given the proposal of late opening hours. Number six, the report gives the impression that the High Street is largely commercial retail, given from the flats at the Foreman's Centre down to Peter Street and St Paul's Church. There is just one retail unit and the remainder is housing. This is simply not the case. This is not a vast town high street of shops, but a village high street with residential places above and surrounding the area. Furthermore, the report suggests that there are similar businesses with late opening hours. Again, this is not wholly accurate. There are hairdressers and the like in the high street, and some do have late opening hours, but only limited to 1 day a week, not all week. The committee agreed that they still wish to support the application, but wish to see greater control over the opening hours and could not support the same until the appropriate fire regulations have been complied with. Headcorn Parish Council trusts that you will give these matters your due consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pyman. I could say something myself, but I'm going to refer it now to the other ward member, Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm reminded, I think it was about this time last year, when we looked at a certain coffee shop in Headcorn High Street, and I remember saying at the time that Headcorn High Street is a beautiful high street. It's in a conservation area, and uniquely, it's not just a high street, it's a residential area. And I think this is what we're forgetting here. What's worrying me, I don't have an objection to the business per se. I think we need to see a vital high street. We need to see the right use for this listed building. But I am concerned, just having looked at the planning portal, the Speaker has said that he doesn't believe that the Environmental Health Officer ever went out there. Having read the planning portal and the comments from the Conservation Officer, I don't think the Conservation Officer has ever set foot in Headcorn High Street, or certainly visited this building, because everything he said is a reaction to what a comment from the case officer. So I'm a little bit concerned, and I just want to know if we can condition the fireproofing, the soundproofing, and restrict the hours, because would that be reasonable? Would that meet the test if we stuck to the hours that the other businesses do? Or the post office does, which is the preference of the parish council and the residents. Because I live there, I live in Headcorn, so I know when the shops are open, and they're not open on Sundays. The hairdressers aren't open on Sundays. They're not open till 9 o'clock in the evening, one day a week. So I'm supporting the business. I don't have a problem with that, but I do think that we need to take the residential amenity into consideration here.
I'll ask officers to respond to that, but I do have other speakers.
Number of questions that you raised in that point. With regard to building regs and fire safety, again, as I said, that's covered under separate parts of the legislation, and as you realise, we don't sort of interact between those two. The issue about conditioning the ceilings, now the issue is, on that particular point, you've got a listed building, so you don't know what the impact of that's going to have on the listed building. You condition it, you may suddenly turn around that when they submit a listed building application, it's totally unacceptable. So on that basis, that would be works. So in terms of were they going to come forward on that basis, they would have to do that under a listed building application. And as I said, we don't know what the impact of that's going to be. I can understand the concerns, but this is a commercial property that can be used now that, as I said, a lot of people will say, what is the difference between a tanning salon and a hairdresser's? They both sell services. They both do have shop windows displays and everything else. There's not a lot of difference. It just happens to be that the use class order sort of differentiates that generally this is a sui generis use. So again, you have to go on to, is it reasonable when, a shop could open up in there and they could open up longer hours? So I think, you get to that point, is it reasonable to impose those relevant conditions? If members consider it is, then obviously that may stop someone going for and investing in that shop and then opening up that base, that unit. So I have to think it's a difficult balance, because I accept the concerns of the resident that's been raised there in terms of safety, and I understand that will sit with members. Again, is it reasonable and necessary when it can open up now without any of that occurring? With regard to the opening hours and conditioning those, again, as I said, there are other uses in the high street that operate different hours. You've got the public houses. I think the issue is, and opening hours change, you do have to look at the impact on amenity. I think when you're looking at the activity of this particular use, it's pretty low activity in terms of where people sit on a, not that I've ever been in one, but I presume people sit in a tanning salon, and it's quite low activity. If it's only got 2 beds, you can't really have a lot of activity going on in there. So I don't think the hours proposed are late. They're certainly not like a pub, and I know people live right next to pubs and they come out pretty inebriated, and we don't really stop those uses and trying to control those times. I think the high street is under difficult times where people are trying to invest in a business, and I think we have to be careful about how we control that business in these hours. If it was 10, 11, 12 o'clock, I'd say yes, members. But I don't think these hours are unrealistic, and I don't think it would be reasonable to try to control that down so much further, especially when you take into the intensity or low intensity of the activity. Oh God, I'm about to run out of power. So hopefully that answers your question, Councillor Prendergast.
You may come back.
Mr. Bailey, are you suggesting then that this perhaps should have been accompanied by a listed building consent application, whatever, just to...
No, I'm not suggesting that at all, on the basis that you can have independence. They're both dealt with under the Planning Act and Listed Building Conservation Areas Act, so they're separate. You can't force someone to submit a listed building application. Obviously, if they need to do works to a listed building, they would then have to submit a listed building consent before they could do the works. Otherwise, it will be a criminal offence. So you can't force someone. It may be good practice, but as I said, the applicant is just proposing no internal, external works apart from the removal of that wall. Now, on that basis, because it's a modern addition, the impact on the integrity of the building is not readily available, so it's not requiring a consent on that basis. But were they to do any other alterations like signage, anything else like that that affected the integrity and character, they would need a listed building consent.
Thank you. Again, I've got several speakers on the issue. Councillor Bolton first.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I just wonder, picking up on that last point that Councillor Prendergast in order for this committee to recommendation or something in hours, and I don't think it would be as the I am happy to
Councillor Cox, did you want to come in on?
Speak to about this application. Hi. And therefore, you including a heater. Ambiance. Or as as just a note.
No death metal.
But no heavy metal. But I really think that if someone can come up with something to put in here, it's not a large shop at all. And there will probably be a stand-up sun facility. I would have thought that's the normal for the... come to this, and I'm
It's okay, actually, Chairman.
It's all
then that will be picked up. Becomes a nuisance. We legislation in place.
Understanding the applicant will be building regs. I couldn't said that the use could operate.
no.
To liaise with the conservation on that, but it
So
and someone in a couple of minutes, I'll just play.
I can see Councillor Pat. Please.
To this application. Accordingly, thank you.
Right, how are we doing, officers?
Right, thank you, Chair.
Before
This is an application to show you the site. Shows it a bit better. To Lake House. And looking back. Access to the from existing property. It is considered to have limited not more than 7 metres. Floor containing the bedrooms and other accommodation. Is supported by ecology, and a tree survey has been where development of infill development
speak, please.
The house and 2 garages. Application MA/0. Be in conflict with the the surrounding area in that would result in a significant of the adjoining lake plan. This proposed cottage, which dates back to the impact mentioned. The plan of the wide variety also an environmental risk. Flooding of local homes occur. A further impact on the local effect on their privacy.
The middle, one of the more Woodland's Walk, which hand side there is a house. Garden overlooking having a 4-bedroom harder than most, with kind of the wildlife and the country. To take certain trees down to get access. Thank you.
In terms of the gardens and so on. Sustainable grounds. In light of being investigated, the I look at condition 7, urban area. I mean, for example, when it's on a fence or the side of a garage or friendly, and this lake sterilise the pot. And are not seen to be about it. But what we and detail that we questioning how we achieve that detail. Which have just lost their habitat. I am prepared to move that we grant I think probably and that's where I would like to
delegated to the local. So
that effect. On that basis, minutes. Yeah. Seconder for the seconder. I'll just give recommendations. Correct me on
Obviously, there is planting, etc. around the for the first 7 to 10 years.
time in this at this planning committee. We'll remind you to that.
Setting of heritage assets. Heritage assets there. There are land well, can we
All agreed there, and we're looking for something a bit more big. I want us to come back then.
If I landscaping condition, comments on heritage assets, obviously the officer has made that and the officer has covered the key because that can I'm just making that point.
and distance, and that's not what was set in.
I think we'll take the point. So maybe issues we can take forward elsewhere. And before we do that,
to be sort of some bird boxes. Wildlife-friendly drainage. Landscaping scheme. Hedgerows. Board councillor in the parish.
right, ladies and gentlemen. Item. Now we have no speakers. On that said item, one person should. Myself actually going to that conclusion. We have nobody present. I do need to be sure that you to vote. I'm through the motions again and say, has therefore we will vote on this item. I'm not going to bother. Has anybody been lobbied on? Lobbying? Are you all? So we have the. On the basis that it was unanimous, then